he's against Middle Eastern man, against Turkish man, but my father was actually a very introverted. He would not share much. I mean, and this was somehow, in a way, the sad thing. I mean, of course, he would be working all day long. I mean, my father was doing overtime. He had to enable his three children to go to school, as well as build a future in Turkey, because no one knew. This is what many people don't know, and I haven't talked about it. But back in the days, you had some sort of a fear that you are being deported, because you could be deported. In Austria, no matter how long have you been there, even though if you're legal, so we were all legal there, you could be deported any time, and there were, of course, within the migrant community some sort of fierce threats. Yeah, it is only a matter of time until a far right party comes along, and then they start deporting us, because my parents witnessed something like this. This was in the 80s. In the 80s, my father talked about this briefly, that people started deporting any foreigner who was unemployed. So, and in Austria, if you wanted to avoid, or if you want to avoid deportation, you had to have a job. So without a job application, they could easily deport you. And even I could have been deported before I got the Austrian citizenship. So it doesn't matter. So in Austria, you do not get the citizenship, because even if you're born in Austria. So I had to apply for the citizenship. However, my father was actually a funny guy, but we didn't know about it very much, because he was always working. In my youth, I only saw him on the weekends, and he was mostly sleeping. He was hard working. I mean, this is I sometimes helped him. I sometimes worked with him, and you could really see that he's somehow, he loves to work. It was this working ethics which made him I think unique. He was some sort of restless, always on a move. I mean, I saw him once working. I saw him. He sometimes took me with me, and you could somehow see this. I mean, of course, you have to be aware that if you work in an assembly line, that the air machine, in a way, does not leave you does not leave you alone, in a way, or that you always are occupied. So you don't have much time to just do nothing. This is actually not that bad as it sounds, because in this way time goes by faster, because if you do the same kind of movements day in, day out for 8 hours, or if you work overtime for 10, 12 hours, then it is pretty much tough, because time does not pass by, and then you go nuts. This is partially what happened to me. I mean, if you work in an assembly line, the worst thing someone can do is put a watch in front of you, because no one would wear a watch, because who is that nuts? Because this would drive you crazy. However, my father was not. I mean, there are, of course, like I said, prejudices against Middle Eastern man, that Middle Eastern man don't know, for example, how to cook. This of course, this is not true. And there are some sort of this was after 9/11. After 9/11, the so-called feminism. This is nothing else as prejudice disguised as feminism. They tried to find a scapegoat for why all these young folks from the Middle East, why they are radicalized and so on. I mean, no one really took interest in the failed integration. It is always about seeking for scapegoats. However, my father knew how to cook because he lived the life, he lived a single life, and my father would wash the dishes and would even do the laundry. And I even remember that Austrian women, and this is really interesting, that Austrian women would would laugh at my father when they would see him hang out the laundry or do the dishes, because they themselves or among their family it was actually very uncommon that men do this kind of work. So it is not so. It is not so that that Middle Eastern men, that there would be all pashas, and that they would not only be bad role models for their boys and so on. So this was not the case. We actually really saw our father helping in the kitchen, and and this was for us very natural. So it was nothing. I think. I mean, I cook myself. I like cooking, and I don't think that as a man that you should not cook, or that cooking would be feminine, or doing the dishes, doing the laundry or something. I mean, this is all a lot of prejudice. However, but my parents, of course, they lived their lives how they knew best. You have to be aware they came from a special ground. And then if you're an Austrian, if you're a migrant in Austria, then you, of course, apply your knowledge of life you had in Turkey as a farmer, as a poor farmer. And then, of course, you get experiences as being a foreigner. You come to Austria, you do not know the language. German is one of the more difficult languages there. And then, of course, no one really cared about you. My father told me he came to Austria, and 2 days thereafter he had already a job, and he went working, and this was all it. And in work, and in its workplace, there were Turkish migrants too, and the state didn't much care whether you learn German and so on. So this entire integration, this was different back then. I mean, now everyone talks about, yeah, we have to teach our migrants the proper language, but this is something you could have made back then. I mean, my father had of course his character traits, or some specifically character traits. When I mean, he was an overthinker. He used to think all by himself for hours. I think this is one trait I inherited from him, and he would always think the best of people. I mean, some called him naive. He would be gullible to any kind of deceit. I mean, of course, if you are surrounded by crooks and deceptive people, they will take advantage of you. But this is not an issue where someone is gullible, rather about the moral stand of a society, and there is indeed some issues here. But I really admired my father for one thing, and this was despite of his poverty, and mm, despite of that, he was always down to earth. I mean, this is everyone always thought, because he was so introverted. My father, because he was so introverted, everyone thought, he is this, he is not very smart, he is not wit, he's not very thing, or he's very gullible. But it was rather that he was somehow too he thought too much of other people. I mean, of course, it was later called as weakness, as weakness, but nevertheless, this is somewhat it is difficult to explain this, but it was not weakness. I mean, if you really listened to him, and this is, I mean, here there is of course, he had not much friends. If you're introverted, if you're close to the world, I mean, you don't have much friends. However, but if you really listen to him, and if you will, and if he would open up to you, it was really remarkable. I mean, his observations. I mean, these were great, and he was, of course, this is what I heard, a great love, um, love. He would used to write a lot of love letters. I mean, I don't know. Uh, I've never read one of them. I only read some of his diary entries. There was not much of it in his video, pity. But he used to uh, sing. I mean, he would love to sing, and he would just sing about, uh, sing along. He would just make up some melodies, and he would sing. I mean, he was, in a way, you did not learn much of it because of this work, because of this thing, and so of course it is a big question mark. I mean, how would his life would have been, and so on. But nevertheless, I will always see him as positive, and I happened to learn him. It was just very such a pity that he did not open up him until he was some sort of, yeah. And of course it would have been easier for everyone if he would have just opened up, if he would have set his mind. I mean, because there were some issues with his own family as well, which were just, to say it mildly, not okay, and he should have said something, and this would have been way more different if he had. But he had this good nature. I mean, he believed in his family and his siblings, and he wouldn't know better. And then, of course, the thing that changed everything, and this was, of course, their death in 2012. This was a car accident. To this very day, there were some dubious things going on, and while I don't want to go too much in this, but the moment I heard about this, I couldn't believe it. I know that some people may not understand this, will assume that this is just a phrase. No, I could not believe it because then I was in Vienna. I was a student. This was my freshman year. This were I had started very late in the university. This was my freshman year, and then my sister called me. I remember it was on a Sunday that both my parents died in a car accident in Zell am See. It was winter, and in winter the roads are frosty. My father was actually a very careful driver, and yeah, something happened there, and the car slid. My father lost control, and the car and another car hit them, and this is how they passed away. I mean, it was difficult for me. I mean, I couldn't believe that. No one could believe that, and my father, of course, for me it was difficult, and of course different, and then entire this Muslim funeral, because in the Muslim funeral, or in an Islamic funeral, the death is being washed. So I washed the dead body of my father. It was a very, very crushing for me to hold the dead hand of my father while I was washing him. This was some sort of his, before he's being put into a coffin, he's being washed, and it was really, well, I don't know what to say, but it is a very, very, very cold procedure. But nevertheless, I mean, I held his hand. I held this hand which saved me. Which which could do something unbelievable. I mean, and there he liar. I think this is someone you cannot describe this. This was soul crushing to see this, to